You can talk about how One Piece does characters, and how life and tragedy affects them. You can gush on the massive world building, or get excited by the intentional cohesion of the story, but there is one aspect that ties it all. Have you seen those little speckles of dialogue or information with a theme in common?
あいつはな、万物の声を聞けた。それだけのこと。
They always end up coming together to say something massive. They're sprinkled along the story because a lesson is larger than a speech and bigger than their universe. Whole ideas and issues that most likely will never be directly acknowledged by the characters or the story, because doing it bluntly transforms art into propaganda and your entertainment into a sermon or a lecture. Art shows you joy and sorrow, pain and pleasure, right and wrong, but it doesn't tell you to do either, nor imposes a concrete definition.
そんなこと勝手に決めろ
Undertones are the threads that make One Piece feel real. One Piece has around 90% male audience, and Oda portrays the struggles of the gender quite often, but I've never seen them under the microscope of many reviewers. The absence of attention is ironic, yet completely logical, because we're pressured into suffering in silence so bad that we diminish our feelings and pretend nothing affects us, pushing the hollow lesson onto ourselves until it becomes the most normal thing. You see? In fantastic stories, emotional walls are glorified, making a stoic, numb, cold, and silently traumatized characters that will never go to therapy the coolest. It can be used as a slick angle that deepens the character, although at the same time, it can also be used as a tool to not give them much substance. What I'm trying to say is, fiction can do it in a good or bad way, but once you take off from Wonderland, the real world's reflection on why those characters look so marvelous is kind of ugly. We cannot train ourselves to become superhuman, nor we're born to be gods. We are not an unbreakable shield with a thick skin, and prolonged pain doesn't make us stronger. Yet in the real world, we still have a very romantic idea about it, so we try to withstand pain alone as if we were a cartoon. And why wouldn't we? To many of us, loneliness is a given, and we cannot even fathom the idea of sharing pain, so we might as well dream about a better reality while we go face first to ours, a coping mechanism that saves you from insanity. That mentality of surviving blows and just walk them off evolved so much it's become an ideal, imposed to those who are not interested in flexing our strengths and hiding our weaknesses at all costs. Oda understands all of that to a T, because One Piece explores thoroughly what being a man means, in both fiction and reality. There are those who are strong enough and choose to withstand anything life throws at them and welcome the challenge, taking full pride on doing it, gladly spending their lives as well as risking death. A few steps after them, there are those who were in a checkered position, so they had no choice but to excel, carrying an impossible burden until the end. A burden they would choose not to bear if all consequences could just disappear. Those two character molds are the closest thing to perfection Oda lets us have. A perfect character on the screen is something that the average shonen spectator desires, so much so that Oda takes the time to mess with those people and has several perfection hooks placed all around the story. Characters that are said to be a one-dimensional powerful guy whose whole existence and personality bases around one specific cool objective, build up in whispers and rumors only to see less, or better said, more than promised, when they finally get the spotlight. For example, Akasaya's 9 Raizo. Raizo is a ninja with the scroll fruit, and Oda could have made him one of the absolute fan favorites if he looked like a Naruto import, but he chose to make him look almost underwhelming. And even though he's extremely powerful, and even if he has mastered practically all the ideal ninja abilities you could wish for, it will never be an audience favorite because they will never get past his looks on the final tally. While Oda does use the fiction license on occasion, he's sacrificing a lot of popularity to send you a message. Stop building impossible standards in your mind, you idiot. Whitebeard is the biggest example of quit looking for perfection. But, ironically, his most gigantic feat is based around exploiting the perfect image he's built. That's the best way he found to keep enemies at bay from his loved ones. And not only One Piece's world falls for it, some of us do too. He pretends so well that many viewers don't even notice he's dying, since way before Marineford. There are people that are well aware of those facts, just don't really measure and apply what they mean. He was built up to be the best, and when we met him, he could no longer deliver. So he had to still be a unit, be the greatest father, give his life, die standing, and have an unmarked back to be validated and to compensate for being an actual human being. But who does finally see right through him? Just as some don't realize that this was a whole merry interaction, people don't always get the full extent to his Crocodile bit. Crocodile lost to Whitebeard, like many others have been defeated by the Emperors and other legends. When that happens, Oda always gives you 3 options: give up, give in, or prepare for round 2. Crocodile was in Alabasta preparing for next time. He being defeated by a rookie didn't break him, and he being incarcerated had him pulled down didn't either. He still had one goal: to defeat the big guy. We see Crocodile trying to kill Nugate only for him to end up helping Ace and Luffy. A cool moment, but a little cheesy unless you understand it. Back then, Whitebeard was strong enough to look like a mountain against Crocodile. A mountain he devoted his life to climbing. But when he arrived, he noticed a new Whitebeard, and a deep conflict surfaced. But the guy who never stopped yelling to his world about his legendary greatness, massive name, and infinite power let us in the secret, and Crocodile caught on. I'm just a human, dude. I can't help it. I came here to try and save my son. I think that's all I'm good for now. Crocodile too fell for the false narrative of perfection. Imagine the struggle Zoro would face if Mihawk just died of a heart attack a day before they fight. That's what just happened there. And in the middle of that shocking revelation, he noticed something. Some are so okay taking him to his knees, finishing the job and claiming his place. The Navy made an appointment to beat down an old man to death and use it to make propaganda. He was conflicted, but hearing someone who used to be so proud and strong break in front of him also made him feel empathy, so he decided to combine all he was feeling and direct it towards the shameless bastards. Oda swapped names, and he had the impel down prisoners say Buggy was the one feeling that way. Let's bring down the fantasy a notch. What about the one that too was somewhat forced into lifting everything by himself, but rather than enduring that pain his whole life, took the first and probably only real chance to bring himself back? The big question for many about the Luffy vs Katakuri fight was if the second son of the Charlotte family let Luffy win, and although the story is nuanced and open for interpretation, I have an answer for you. Katakuri gave Luffy a chance to win the Big Mom vs the Straw Hats, but he did not provide any ease for Luffy vs Katakuri. He actually decided to issue a whole different duel on it. He was told how changing himself to avoid showing perfection would improve how people see him, and he didn't care. He just wanted to be happy expressing himself, until he saw how public image could affect someone close to him, and just like our big old man, he decided to become another ideal of perfection. His trauma became his ability, the need to see any danger coming, in addition of being strong enough to neutralize it. Building a life based on third-party perception is the only way it can be done, he thought. And it went well. He became the pinnacle of perfection among his own, until he met his long-lost lost twin. That person that resembles him so much but took the path he was on initially. One of self-embrace and not a filter in sight.
生きていけねえ自信がある。何もできねえから助けてもらうんだ。
At first, he spat on the silly image he saw, looking down on Luffy. However, looking at it made him feel nostalgic, and with his spirit of wonder fueled, asked himself who's the twin who made a wrong choice. Straw Hat, are you as strong as the perfect version of yourself? Deep down, he did want Luffy to win, but letting him win would prove nothing. When Luffy fell because of the needle, he thought for a second the answer was no. Disappointed and frustrated, especially when it had come that far, he was ready to get back into his force ideals. But when he found out the actual reason, he was happy enough to make the opposite decision, and he told Luffy, I no longer think you're much weaker than me. That was more for him than Luffy. After that moment, you can see how Katakuri's fighting style changes. He is free now of a fake concept of perfection. It doesn't matter if you wanna call the result a draw or Luffy's victory, because for Katakuri it meant the same. I will use your victory to unlock my shackles. Luffy won. They both gave it all. He conceded. He didn't let Luffy win. All those statements are true, even if they feel contradicting. Yes, he could have had stopped Luffy from getting out, but that was a different thing, and a rather pathetic move after losing. And that wasn't a questionable choice, because even if Katakuri is loyal, he knows what kind of person Lin Lin is. Almost every single one of her children do, and Katakuri loves his siblings. And the most wholesome thing is, although she didn't like it, his sister Brule respected his perfection path when he went on it. She was the first one chanting about his perfection, the one who made sure his new choice was implemented by announcing her brother's defeat to everyone, and the first one offering her unconditional love once he decided to quit nourishing the image. Juggernaut almost perfect characters aside, we find guys like Usopp or Sanji, often criticized for not meeting the manly standards, getting countless disappointment eye rolls when people don't agree with them, what they do, decide, or how far they go. They're expected to make constant and permanent progress. They're expected to make all the right choices and bring an S-tier game every single time. And that's why they hold the biggest and most real depiction of men, enforced not only by women and society, but ourselves. All of that embedded into a simple rule: you're only worth as much as the value you provide. Nobody cares about any other aspect of you, so harbor everything, face tough, and overcome it without breaking a sweat, because everything less than excellence will be counted as harsh deductions in everyone's eyes. Thought and lesson enforced by a tragic fact: if you cannot carry your own weight, nobody will be there to catch you. That's how we now stray from fiction into raw territory. And while I was working on these undertones, I discovered one of Oda's actual few mistakes. We know Oda is insanely consistent, so finding things like that can be a real challenge. And even if you can call some aspects of the story bad, they're still heavily intentional. But while analyzing Sanji's life, I realized that when he first started, he was kind of a successful ladies' man. He tried sweet-talking the woman at Verity, and he had women around his arms in the first banquets, from Arlong Park and Whiskey Peak, but that got deleted pretty quickly. In Skype, he just danced with an old lady, and past that you can mainly see him either cooking or obsessing over someone. Sanji's character was corrected to be romantically lonely. The new version has not been welcomed nicely, because the new loneliness accentuated the part of him that goes hard on the girl obsession, and ultimately his peeping perversion, so people often get disappointed at him for his love of women. But strangely enough, our guy still ranks among the firsts in popularity polls. Why? My theory is simple. People, and more specifically men, do kind of understand Sanji, but they can't elaborate on it. That's why I chose him as my central piece today. When it touches opinion media higher than a survey, like reactions and reviews, he's repeatedly on the line of fire, to the point of almost being hated, and people just end up echoing those opinions in the comments. Very few dare to look past the sexual topics, in fear of validating those actions by omission. That fear can be psychological. People don't want to feel they're excusing sexual perversion to themselves, but it can also be on the PC side. They don't want to be accused of advocating wrongdoing. I don't excuse Sanji's actions, but the frame of judgment is so poorly done that I feel the need to call it out. But before we get into that, why don't we try to understand Sanji first? Sanji is Sora's son, mother whose only wish was for her kids to have feelings, despite her husband's attempt to make them ruthless killing machines. Her wager only fully worked with one of them, and he became his mother's miracle. She wanted him to be able to feel, but she got blessed with the kindest boy she could possibly get. But a kid in development also needs a good environment. If his mother were alive, she would raise that boy as he deserves. However, she passed away as a consequence of giving him humanity. Sanji had no clue until adult life that he being a failure meant something completely different to someone else. With his mother gone, what remained was a whole country where someone sweet just doesn't fit, having constant reminders and endless pressure into changing, because who he is wrong. At that point, he still thought that just maybe his father would eventually change how he perceives him. Even if he knew he couldn't become the expected, he was hoping and aiming for being the bare minimum. A delicate little boy born into an aggressive ideology. A scared little dude that didn't want to cause any harm to people nor animals. A kid that just wanted to be happy and spread the feeling towards everyone. To me, early Sanji is a direct parallel with Rebecca, with the notable exception that Rebecca had an amazing birth father to tend to her late mother's wish, preserving the pure heart she had since birth, while Sanji wasn't so lucky. His not father was literally the law, and the law wanted him to kill and obey. Since he loved his not father and, as any little child, he desperately sought his love and approval. He was doing his best to obey, but it was impossible since he was not made to kill. He couldn't help being sucked and therefore weak, so he was never enough. Reiju was the only one there for him, and she couldn't properly love him without putting herself in jeopardy, so she limited to helping him when nobody was looking. That's why Reiju regularly admires the lengths Sanji is willing to go for someone else, because she can't bring herself to put someone else's needs ahead of her own. She's still selfish in comparison to Sanji. That selfishness is just natural self-preservation, but her conscience still tingles when she decides to protect herself, to the point she's okay dying as punishment for her selfish actions that led her to kill for her father. Anyway, Sanji was sad and in an endless effort to become enough, but he still wasn't afraid to ask for help. But having your father telling you he's relieved you're going away, so glad you're suicidal, and so ashamed of you renouncing being your father, finally broke him and imprinted in his mind. You're neither worthy of love nor help. I don't know if you noticed, but after that event, Sanji has never asked for help again. He put all efforts into being a cook, giving baby steps towards his dreams, despite not having a further chance to make her something delicious again. Before moving on, let's take a breather, because understanding Sanji's past brought to my attention a big parallel between him and Robin. In their own ways, their own existence became a sin. It's a solid undertone how they are both good at similar forms of stealth, but in clearly distinct ways. And how it played out in the overall story. Robin had to hide from the world because of her value, pressure that didn't want their friends to bear, and was scared to death towards the final moment of rejection, because that value was pure weight to any community she entered. And even though Sanji became a capable warrior, he had the opposite problem. He was taught that he was just a drop in the rain, so thinking outside the box was a way to make himself as valuable as he could. When you understand that Sanji has a deep inferiority complex, it becomes even more heartwarming when he talks to Sogeking in Neni's lobby. That was not one of the strongest guys in the crew preaching to the weakest. Finding his value was something Sanji had been thinking since he had memory. When he identified that problem with Usopp, he didn't give him a hollow speech about self-worth. He couldn't just preach what he didn't believe. He just advised him to do as he's been doing since the last decade. And you can see the difference because Zoro didn't know what to tell him at the beginning of Water 7.
寝ろバカ疲れてんだよ
After leaving Garuda, but still carrying his message, Seth saved his life by taking a big sacrifice, and that made Sanji's head spin yet again. Why? Why would you help me? I'm not worth helping, and I didn't ask for it. Now he has to face enormous guilt because of a huge cost this stranger just paid for someone who's worth nothing, making him spend his life atoning as an attempt to return Seth's investment. A deep trauma that proper father's love would eventually help overcome, and it would be amazing if Seth could just do that for Sanji. But he is still a brute ex-pirate, also tied to men's stupid rules, so there was always a line he didn't cross. Seth would not display affection, and therefore he was never able to boost his new son's self-perception, and you can tell he wants to. So it wasn't until Luffy showed up that he used him as an example. That's why them giving up a little bit of that on Barati was a big deal. But as wholesome as that moment was, that also means that is one of the warmest, if not the warmest, display of affection they ever had. So Sanji never healed properly. The idea that stuck was that just by existing, he made Seth unable to reach the Old Blue, and he made him give up his pirate life because of his missing leg, and that was overwhelming. It was crippling him. So Sanji never counted himself as a good thing. Therefore, the restaurant was the only good thing Seth had left. So he took it upon himself to spend his life repenting and tending to the building. And yet, there's still so much love in both of them. And being unable to show their emotions in a normal way with hugs and words of affection, they funneled those feelings with a manly outlet. Sanji was taught what I call boy love, violence, and rough speaking to say one thing but mean another. Sanji was initially weak because he didn't want to cause harm. He had no motive in his mind, so his body just couldn't comply to Judge's demands. But once in the East Blue, he understood and learned that weirdly, pain can be loved too. And just like that, he became the strongest of all cooks as a distorted way of showing care. He became what he needed to become to finally communicate what he always wanted to say to both his father and the other cooks. And even if us as witnesses find it heartwarming, we cannot romanticize boy love. It bottlenecks affection. So Sanji learned how the world works for men. A logical, cold planet that won't take pity on you. A place where being a sissy is not allowed. You have to abide and be responsible for yourself as well as keeping a toxic attitude at all times. That's why they chose to make him chase his dreams by insulting him and his abilities, trying to make him feel bad and finally leave. Initially, he intended to apply that logic to everyone. Boy love was not exclusive for men. However, yet another confusing lesson came. Seth told him that way of life didn't apply to women, and if he were to try and do it, he'd need to cut off Sanji's penis and kill himself afterwards. It's evident how belittled Sanji was to himself, as he didn't care about what happened to him, but promptly asked why does he have to pay a price. And although the lesson was fucked up, Sanji gained a father that only asked for one straight thing to be happy. He said, "Don't become someone I hate," and the only thing needed for that was not harming women. Of course he will comply. This one asked for one single straight thing, while his not father asked for the impossible. So, adding up every lesson he's had so far, which are an initial good feeling towards women because the only really loving people in his life for the longest time were female. Natural attraction because Sanji is a heterosexual man. A cold world he's bound to no matter where he goes. A manly world ruled by rules and obligation. An arbitrary idea that women must be treated with care at all costs. An exemption from the cold world he knew. And colossal amounts of self-hate because of trauma. That recipe gives you Sanji, the women's doormat and pervert. He already thought he was worthless, but he wasn't aware that women were divine. That is a huge gap in value, taken as the most normal thing. That gap means he must go out of his way to try and impress girls or get satisfaction, because Sanji is not nearly enough to account for a whole girl's worth. Tell me that doesn't sound familiar. So just like leaving his not father, Sanji left the restaurant but took his traumas with him, as well as his worldview, and the banter passed from the cooks and father to mainly Zoro. Sanji and Zoro often clash, rivalry fueled and founded by different life views, but bound and kept on pure love, understanding and admiration from one another. How Zoro's resolve doesn't flinch when he has all against him, and how a broken spirit is still capable of living on Sanji. On my first watch, I too didn't understand how Sanji could think the crew would just leave him behind when the whole cake arc was afoot. Did you not see and take part of challenging the world for Robin? Practically against her will when she tried to do the exact same thing you're doing right now? Why wouldn't you expect the same outcome? But when I decided to actually analyze it, the introspection answered it promptly. As I explained, the world of men and women is different, and we have an unfair advantage because the audience has had the privilege of knowing the Straw Hats for over 15 years at that point. Consequence is a thing predominant for the male gender. The math needs to add up, like Usopp in Water 7, where he did need to acknowledge his mistake to be forgiven. So Sanji engineered his actions to go by the same logic. That's boy love, that's all you're meant to get. And even if Zoro would do the same speech, whichever Straw Hat acted like that, because he wasn't talking about the world of men, but the world of pirates. My point remains, especially from our Blondie's point of view. In this rough world, real, unconditional love is something impossible. So Sanji used those rules as a way out. Once he felt his value was bigger for everyone, serving as a pawn of sacrifice. It was his manly responsibility to sway away and just disappear, even if he knew the crew will try their best to get him back. When Zoro and Sanji almost sacrificed themselves in Thriller Bark, it was because everyone was knocked out. There was no other way. If there were any other options, Zoro would not put himself in that situation. But Sanji would, as he's desperate to find and maximize his value, like Baby 5. Muscat knew that to the dot and denied Sanji his senseless action. Sanji convinced himself the last decade to serve as a pawn of sacrifice, while Zoro took the executive decision of being a sacrificed king. That was his train of thought in Whole Cake. He felt caged, and his logic forced him into that position. Sanji is not the one who goes out swinging until the last move. Sanji is the one who sees checkmate in 10 and decides to give himself up for the good of the board. He tried and used pirates' rules to tie Luffy's hands, making himself a Usopp without the apology, making himself a Zoro without being in check. Luffy understood Sanji's pain all along, because he's seen Sanji for who he is since he met him. And that's one of the biggest beauties of Oda's story. Luffy doesn't want anyone to become anything. On his ship, everyone can be themselves. Scars, trauma, flaws, weaknesses and everything. But the moment that means losing them, he will be in the first line of fire no matter what. He sees what Sanji is doing and he will not have it. We don't see Luffy enforcing his title so often, but he used it here to override Nami trying to bring up Zoro's lesson. A lesson Nami learned the bad way, when she almost had to say goodbye to Usopp. Nami was ready to forgive him at a time, but was not allowed to do it. Every single crewmate was on the same page on regards to that. So why is Luffy allowing it this time? Why are the rules suspended? Because your captain says so. For the lack of a better word, let's call girl love to the healthy one. Luffy has always girl loved everyone he likes, a form of love that can make you do illogical stuff, like announcing your attacks on a potential deathmatch. Little Sanji wanted to love everyone like this, and that's what he does in whatever ways he can find, after being denied to treat men with such energy. You see him rough talking to men to concede the love he's giving them. Saving Gin's life, saving Usopp in Skype, beating himself up for letting his friends disappear in Shabondi, saving Kinemon and G5 at Punk Hazard, his crewmates, father and fellow cooks in Whole Cake, a lot of times finding convenient when a woman is involved to excuse himself for the noble action, while secretly caring about men in a similar way. The only blind spot I've seen was with the kids at Punk Hazard, and it's comprehensible since he wasn't allowed to be a kid. However, he immediately adopts Nami's resolve, using her as a port of connection, but accepting is the right thing to do, and he's a good person, improving himself when he finds the chance. But while everyone ignores men's suffering, Sanji is the first one to help them because Sanji loves men and understands men's problems better than everyone. When he almost became a transvestite, many were kind of mad at that, and while I know Sanji's not into that, it was a comfortable place for someone like him. If he were to live there, he could love everyone as little Sanji wanted, and that must have felt liberating. Now that we understand the strength of Sanji's love, let's get back to Whole Cake. Sanji thought nobody could love him like that, and he also didn't deserve it. That unconditional love that he wants so bad is not meant for him. Then, Luffy made a statement. Zoro's ideal of a captain and showing weakness. Fuck the rules of the pirates. Fuck boy love. Fuck apologizing and the consequences of what you just did. Fuck food, and you know what? Fuck my dreams. You want unconditional love? You always had it with me. I'd throw anything away for you in a heartbeat. If my only choices are dying here like a dog and escaping without you, I'd gladly take the first one. But I know I don't have to, because you would never let me die. I love you unconditionally, and I'm going as far as I need to show you. This isn't a captain's order to come back. This is me, begging you, telling you, I'll meet any condition you want to set for us winning you back. But I'm not the only one. Everyone on my ship agrees. The whole crew wants to let everything go. Although I'm glad Zoro lives in ignorance. They all boundlessly love him like he wants to be loved, even if they have failed to show it so far. Overlooked undertones in form of gags just see as a little joke or something to fill empty space, yet emphatically portray Sanji's self-perception and hidden sadness. Sanji thinking so little of himself that he would gladly be a slave, shield, or anything, only proudly announce for women, but really offered to everyone. The hidden little gag of him not getting the triumphant hug or catch at the end of the battle. All of those were small reminders of his place in the world. And speaking of gags, let's now dive into the perversion aspect, I promise you. I won't get too much into it because whether you like it or not, I don't think it's that important. First and foremost, the outside view. If you want to hold art accountable of teaching and setting a bad example for an audience, even if the consumer are younger generations, you're stupid. Art is a symptom of society, not a cause. And if it's a cause for someone, that's the fault of who raised that person. I told you, if you want to put PC guidelines on art, it becomes propaganda. Now into the story itself. People give importance to sexual gags based on personal beliefs and taboo. And just like individuals like doing that in the real world with real people, people ignore Nami's views to impose their own, talking over her. Nami, the main victim of Sanji, doesn't think nudity is that much of a taboo. She was raised by someone that taught her to use it as a tool, and the same people that frown upon what Sanji is doing cheer Nami when she uses her attributes as an asset. But wait, I'll play along if you insist in giving it importance and you need to tell me that it's her body to make such decisions. I agree, but I need to call out your double standards by raising you one. Nami physically abuses almost all the men in the crew, and not only when they're being perverts, also when they're being annoying, when they make a mistake, or just when she gets upset for her own goals. And I've never seen a soul complaining about that, especially since men never defend themselves when it happens. She also doesn't mind psychologically abusing Sanji. And that is in a nutshell how society treats men, and that comes in sexual versions too. I even heard people call Sanji transphobic when in Kamabaka Queendom, ignoring he's actually getting harassed and almost abused. They obviate every good thing and over-focus on his mistakes, both sexual and personal. You cheer for Zoro when he says he's the only one who can call himself stupid for his goals, since he's putting his life on the line. But when Sanji finds one, like dying for seeing mermaids, you call him stupid and get tired of it, not noticing the irony, not noticing that's what Oda's actually going for. You are happy when Sanji finally starts thinking about himself in Whole Cake, but in Wano, you critique his decision of not getting stronger, or him still being unable to hit women. Sanji was a person who would prefer dying before Robin getting a small bruise. Remember that I told you, Sanji hasn't asked for help again since he left his not father.
しょうね。頼ってくれてありがとう。嬉しかったわ。
Luffy and the whole crew accept everyone for who they are, because they know they're a good person on top of everything. Yet you refuse to do the same, and think you're the one with the right take when you take shots at them. If you are one of the victims of the struggles of men in the real world, I just want to say, one of the marvelous things of this story is that we feel we can call ourselves Straw Hats, as we feel we're with them and share their values. But if you call yourself a Straw Hat and still act like an idiot, I can just say, if Luffy existed, he'd see you like this. And also, you're not a Straw Hat.